Over the course of the last few years, we are seeing that most large enterprises are actually noticing that we can actually create an incubation unit within the large enterprise, and we can create our own startups. Some success stories in that and some failures, and obviously we have our fair share of knowledge on creating these incubations within large organizations. But across the valley, there is every large enterprise that actually has a small incubation unit within. If we create a startup within that's plays to our strength and place strategic bets on that, which plays to our strength, then we see a propensity for that particular startup to take off within. And also the other thing that we've noticed is you cannot have I am an employee of a large company, so I'm just going to, this is my day job. You have to have that founder mentality even within a large enterprise. And if you don't have that that culture within people, it's actually hard, even within a large enterprise, with all of the resources that you have.
That's right. I think it all comes down to people. It comes down to the mindset of the person and maybe also the incentives of the person to make sure, how do you compensate this person? How do you make sure that they are invested in the success of this incubated company versus maybe the larger company? And how do you make sure is it the right mix of equity versus salary that you can compensate there? But it's more than the compensation. Compensation is extrinsic. It's about their motivations and what they're excited by. Are they more interested in managing something that's large or growing something from scratch? That's one. And the second one, I think you hit the nail on the head. It has to be something that's aligned with the strengths of the parent company. It can't be something so far off base that there is no assets they can bring to bear.
That's right.
Because otherwise, why even be an incubation with this large company? It could just be a venture capitalist somewhere. It's just money. Right. So it needs to be something beyond money.
I mean, you can see with examples like Amazon Web Services, the more infrastructure that they deliver externally, it is actually helping their retail business, which is actually an online business, strengthen its core, that's their core business. And time again, we've seen within our own group that the more strategic bets that we place to our strength is actually working in our favor. Obviously, being in Silicon Valley, we hear terms like fail fast. Fail quickly, but learn quickly. I want to understand from your perspective, basing our conversation on startups, or whether it's a startup that is funded externally or incubated within a large enterprise. What's your perspective on these cutesy mantras that we hear about failing fast and failing quickly and being resilient and learning from it?
It's interesting. It all starts again with how you think about failure. If you think about failure as something to learn from and something to iterate based on the learning, that's one thing. That's actually the right mentality, because ultimately, if you don't fail, you can't really learn from it and succeed. And I think it comes down to three things. One, hiring the right mindset of people with the right mindset, people who are not afraid to take risks. Because if you're not taking risks, you're not making progress. The second one is around when you're planning on an annual, especially large companies, when you plan, you need to almost have a separate budget or percentage of resources that are allocated to what I call bold bet projects. Projects that have high beta, that are likely to fail, that have no short-term financial upside, but over the next 5 years could lead to the next big thing for the company. And the third, you need to be able to recognize and celebrate failures publicly, so people feel comfortable failing at all hands, at broad public events. You need to essentially celebrate the people who tried, who took risks, who failed, and actually have them come up and share their learnings and their failures and celebrate them, give applause for them, and hopefully get them to do more things like that. Because without learning, without failing, without taking risks, you will never be able to regenerate and transform your company. All large companies need new projects. There always needs to be a portfolio approach where you have the more mature products, but then how do you get the next set of products that 5 years from now will be huge? You need to have X% of your resources in those projects, and you can't do that without having the right people, the right kinds of incentives, and the right budget allocation where you're allocating people resources, and then celebration and acknowledgement that these things happen publicly.
Yeah, let's dive a little bit deep on celebrating failures. So what we've observed in the valley at large is it's actually very cute to say we failed, we pivoted, and go on. But I think it is more about, from our perspective, what we've seen is the resilience is actually very important. It almost goes back to Charles Darwin's theory, right? It's not the survival of the fittest. It's actually survival of people who are very quick to adapt to change. And what within failure should be embraced is the fact that we tried, but the learnings is something that we need to embrace, and failures need to be deeply inspected to see what is the root cause for this failure.
Exactly right. In fact, I would say before even thinking about failing and risks, you need to have a clear hypothesis of why, when you start a new venture out, what is the hypothesis? What's the market opportunity? What is the customer need this product is satisfying? All of those things. So when something fails, you can actually go back and understand what part of the hypothesis wasn't correct.
Yeah.
And in many cases, it might be that the hypothesis still holds true. It was execution failure, and then maybe you can tweak that failure and do something with it. I think Amazon is a great example where the Fire Phone didn't really work out as they expected, but the Fire Phone led to things like Alexa because they examined a lot of things that they built there, and then they realized the hypothesis, maybe some of those things need to be tweaked, and then they used that to then create a completely new and revolutionary product.
We do talk a lot about failing fast, failing quickly, learning and so on, and we also talked a little bit about how we need to embrace failure, but more importantly, being resilient and understanding why we failed. So going back to the drawing board and saying, here are the few reasons that we failed, one thing we've observed is, as long as you can keep the disagreements about ideas and not make it personal or about people, then coming to the bottom of why we failed becomes a lot more easier.
That's right.
So when you manage large organizations as a head of product, how have you seen conflict management in understanding why something failed? Because it is people's passion, it is people's time, blood, sweat. So how do you resolve these conflicts?
There's this phrase that Andy Grove popularized called disagreeing and committing. You also need, in many discussions, to have a clear decision maker. And so the decision maker, when a company is at a pivotal point and maybe things are not going as well, everyone comes together, you kind of examine, you root cause things, but then there has to be a decision made about the path forward. If it's not clear who's making that decision, things can spiral out of control. So, and then once the decision is made, everyone around the table needs to say, I'm disagreeing, but I'm actually committing to implement and execute on this decision. Otherwise, it's not going to. Because if people are stewing and thinking that they're kind of going to undermine the decision, it's going to fall apart. So it's okay. People need to just publicly get it all out and disagree, but then they need to be committed to execute on it. That's how companies succeed. So many great companies. Slack was a video game company. Instagram was a completely different bourbon, a photo sharing company. So many great companies emerged from changes and pivots, essentially.
So Gokul, the consistent theme between startups working with enterprises or enterprises incubating companies within, the consistent theme that we've actually discussed so far, it comes down to people and how resilient we are as people in embracing failures. And that's been the common thread in all of this discussion.
Embracing change, you're right. All kinds of change, that's exactly right.